Hey everyone, in this video, we will look into one of the most common and widely used React hooks concept known as the useState. If you're getting started with React, then you might have obviously come across this concept known as the useState. In this video, we are about to discuss about what useState actually is, how to use them, the ideology and the working principles behind this useState. And I can assure you that by the end of this video, you will be fully aware of how to use useState in your React projects. Hope you got a better understanding of what we are about to discuss in this video. With this idea and without any further ado, let's get started. First, let's start by creating our React project. And for doing so, I will get the help of Vite. And if you wonder what Vite actually is, you can check out my previous video where we have discussed about how to create React project with the help of Vite. And I will be using the same technique here to create our React project. And the process is going to be very simple. All you need to do is you can just type in the command npm create vite@latest. And it's going to ask you for the project name. Let me give the name for the project as useState tutorial. And I'm going to select the React framework and the TypeScript variant. Let's try opening our project. Here we have our React project. Let's now run the command npm install. And to run our React project, all you need to do is type in the command npm run dev. You can follow along with this link, and here you can notice that our React Vite project is up and running. Now let's try to rewrite our app.txs. Here let's get rid of this entire code. And let's create an empty div element. And before getting started with the video, we will look into the 5 most unique properties of this React hook. Starting with the re-rendering, bailing out, substitution technique. Fourth would be the updated function. And last and finally, we will also discuss about how this useState behaves with the key properties. So these are the 5 most unique properties of this useState. Now let's start discussing it one by one. First, let's start with the question, why do we need to go for using useState? And to answer that, then we create a local variable called name and give it a value alias. And here inside the div, then we try to render the same in the UI screen. And if you notice that, the same is getting rendered in the UI. Then we have a button called change name. And upon clicking this button, I need to change the name from alias to some other value. So whenever this button is being pressed, I will try to call this function handle click. Let me pass this event handler to this on click. And inside this function, then we change the name from alias to Bob. And let me try to console log the same. So initially we are trying to set the name value with alias, and upon the button press event, we try to set it with the new value called Bob. And we are also trying to log the same in the console and also in the UI screen. Let's see what happens. Let me refresh this page, and you can notice that if I click change name, the name on the UI is still alias, but the name what we get in the console is Bob, which is the updated one. What is actually happening is that the name value actually got changed from alias to Bob, but we are not able to see the updated value in the UI screen, which means that the JSX element still holds the old value. It is not re-rendering or it is not updating itself with a new value. And to overcome this problem is why we need to go for using useState. So this useState React hook is capable of re-rendering the entire React component with the updated value. So let's rewrite this entire code with the help of useState. The syntax for useState is going to be const followed by a state variable. Let me give it as name. And second would be the dispatch function. And the common practice is going to be set followed by the state variable name. You actually need to give the prefix like set. That is going to be the common practice while creating any useState dispatch function. And you need to make use of the useState method. and we try to import the same. So this is going to be the state variable, and second is going to be the dispatch function. Since we are wrapping that inside the square bracket, it means that we are actually destructuring this values, which is the name and the set name method. So this is going to be array destructuring. So basically when it comes to React, we might come across destructuring objects and arrays. So there are actually two types, destructuring an array and destructuring an object. In this case, it is going to be destructuring an array. And if you click this use state, you will notice that we have a simple variable followed by a dispatch function. So since they are wrapped inside the array, we are going to destructure the same with the same syntax and name it as name and set name. And inside this use state method, you can provide the initial value. You can provide any value you want. It can be a string, it can be a number, it can be an array, or it can be an object, or it can even be a function itself. So it's up to you. But for this tutorial, to keep it very simple, and we set the data type as string with the initial value as alias. Basically, this name is going to be a state variable which is of type string with the initial value as alias. And here inside this on click, we can't go and straight away set the value like this. All you need to do is you need to make use of the dispatch function, which is the set name here. And inside this function is where we need to pass the new value, which is Bob. And this time, if I refresh this page and if I click name, you will notice that the name of the UI screen actually got changed with the updated value. But the name which we tried to log in the console still holds the old value, which is alias. So it's actually the vice versa of what we saw earlier, right? So let's see what is happening. So whenever this dispatch function is being called, React knows that it needs to update this entire app component with the new value. But it doesn't happen spontaneously. It uses that re-rendering and pass it for the moment unless it completes executing this entire function. When it comes to this line, the name value is still alias. And that is the reason we are getting alias being printed in the console. Once this function completes execution, React re-renders this entire app component with the new value, which is Bob. So while re-rendering this entire component, it updates this name value with Bob. And that is the reason we see the updated value in the UI or the JXS component and still see the old value in the console. But if we try to click this button the second time, we will be able to see the Bob, which is the updated value in the console, because after re-rendering, now the name value is being set to Bob. So if you go over to this and click this change name button, you will notice that now you get the Bob being displayed in the console. So whenever you want to go for updating your state, or if you want to re-render an entire component, basically go for using useState. So with the previous idea, we now able to understand that whenever the dispatch function or the set name in this case is being called, the entire app component re-renders it again with a new value, right? But how do we infer that the app component is being re-rendered upon this set name method call? And to check that, let me try to bring this console log statement outside the event handler. By doing so, whenever the app component is getting re-rendered, this console log statement gets triggered automatically. So we should be able to see this console log statement being printed every time when the app is being rendered. Or in other case, whenever we try to change the state value, the app component re-renders, and subsequently we should be able to see the name value getting printed in the console. This time, instead of string, let me give the initial value as 0. And I'm going to change state value name from name to count. Here I will rename the dispatch function from set name to set count. With the initial value as 0, upon every button click, I'm going to increment the count value. Alright, so whenever the button is being pressed, I'm going to increment the count value by the factor of 1, where the initial value is going to be 0. So let's go to the browser, let's refresh this. The initial value is 0 and the same is being rendered in the UI. And upon clicking this counter, you will notice that the same is being logged in the console, which means that whenever the button is being pressed, it triggers a re-render. we are updating the state value, which automatically triggers the re-render and executes this console log statement. With this, we can infer that our set method is updating this entire app component upon every state change. But that is not going to be the case every time. If suppose here I have set the initial value as 0, instead of incrementing this value by the factor of 1, let me once again try to pass the same value over to this handle click method. Therefore, whenever we try to click this button, we are once again calling this set method, but instead of changing the value, I'm trying to provide it with the initial value itself. And let's try to see if we are able to get the console log being printed. Let me refresh this page, and for the very first time, we are able to see the console log statement being printed. And upon clicking this increment counter, you will notice that the console log statement is not actually getting rendered, which specifies that if the new value which you are trying to update is still going to be same as the initial value or the previous value, then this dispatch function is not going to trigger the re-render. And that is the reason, in this case, since the value which you are going to update and the value which was previously being stored in the state variable going to be same. So the React is smart enough to understand that both values are same, so there is no point in triggering a re-render. And that is the reason we are not getting this console log statement being printed no matter how many times you click this increment counter button. And the reason you are seeing this 2 times is that by default, React uses the strict mode to prevent any accidental impurities. And if you get rid of this and once again refresh this page, and this time you see that the console log executes only 1 time. So this is one thing which we need to keep in mind. If the new value and the old value are going to be same, useState method is not going to get triggered, or it is not going to re-render this app component again. Alright? And there is one other place where we usually get confused while using useState. Say for example, here let me increment the counter by the factor of 1 upon every button click. And let me try to console log the same. So what we are trying to achieve here is, whenever we try to click this button, the counter is going to be incremented by the factor of 1. So initially it is set as 0, and upon every button click, it should change from 0 to 1 and goes to 2, 3 and 4. Here we are trying to console log the same and see if you are able to get the same in the console as well. Let me refresh this page, and if you notice that upon every button click, we are able to get the values being reflected spontaneously in the UI, but the console log statement actually holds the n-1 value. It still lags behind the value which is being rendered in the UI. So this is the same scenario which we have discussed earlier. So whenever the set state is being called, React knows that it should trigger a re-render, but it doesn't happen spontaneously unless it completes executing this entire function. So that is the reason we are still able to get the n-1 value being rendered in the console. And to overcome this, you just need to introduce a third variable. Let me make use of the temp here. And this time, if I refresh this page, you will notice that the value which is being present in the UI and the console are going to be one and the same. So they are going to be in sync with each other. So this is how you overcome this problem. Yet there is one more confusing scenario while working with useState. And to explain that, let me get rid of this code. Here inside this handle click method, let me try to increment the counter value by the factor of 1. So upon every button click, it increments by 1. But if I try to duplicate the same code 3 times, with the previous knowledge, you will actually conclude that whenever this increment counter button is being pressed, it is going to increment the count value by the factor of 3. Since we are calling it 3 times, it should be 1 in the very first stage, then it should be 2, and calling it the third time, the count value should be 3. So this is basically what we try to conclude while using this for the very first time. But if we head over to the browser, and if you notice that upon clicking this increment counter, we still see that the count value increments by the factor of 1 and not by 3. And the reason is that even though if you try to duplicate this code any number of times, it is still going to increment the counter value by the factor of 1. Whenever this app component is being rendered, the React substitutes this value in all places where the count is being used. So initially it is set as 0, so it tries to substitute this 0 instead of this count here inside this function and also in the UI as well. So this is how the React sees the code when it is being rendered for the very first time. And if I click this increment counter button, it tries to call this setCount method 3 times. But the initial value, since it is set as 0, the same is being substituted for all the 3 lines. So it is going to be 0 plus 1, again going to be 0 plus 1, and again it's going to be 0 plus 1. So it is going to set the count value with 1 for 3 times. So that is the reason we are not going to get 1, 2, 3, but instead we are still going to see the count value being incremented by the factor of 1. And for the very second time, React knows that the old value is being replaced with the new value, which is 1. So 1 is going to be the updated value. So this time, if we click this with 1 plus 1 for 3 times, and the same goes on. So this is how the substitution technique works while working with useState. And to overcome this problem, all you need to do is we need to introduce a new technique called the updater function. Let me revert this back. And in order to get the expected output, what we have thought earlier, we need to create an updater function where the count goes to count plus 1. This time, if I duplicate this code 3 times, you should now be able to get the expected result, which is the count should increment by the factor of 3. And let's see if you are able to get the same result. Upon every button click, the count value increments by the factor of 3. So this is what we call the updater function. So this count doesn't point to the state variable. You can give any name you want. It is actually independent of the state variable. So this is how we introduce a new method called the updater function in order to overcome the issue which we face as a result of substitution technique. And finally, let's see how this useState and the key property work in sync in our React project. And for doing so, let me get rid of this entire code. Here inside the app component, I'm going to create a new state variable called version. Let me name the dispatch function as setVersion. The initial value is 0. Right? And let me also create a new file called form.txs. And here inside this form, I'm going to have a separate state variable called name. Its initial value is alias. Inside this div element, I'm going to have an input field where inside the onChange callback, I'm going to update this name value with the value which the user types in the text field. And let me also render the same in the UI as well. And here let me call this form component. And if you refresh this page, you will notice that whatever value which we type here, it is getting reflected in real time, right? And consider a scenario where we need to have a reset button which resets this entire field component with the initial value which is alias. And how do we do that? With the help of useState. It's practically very simple. Let me try to create a separate button over here and name it as reset. And inside the onClick event of this button, I will just try to increase the version allowed. And here inside this form, let me specify the key property as the version. So initially the version is going to be 0, and upon every button click, I'm going to set the key as the version value. So it goes incrementing from 0, then 1, 2, and so on. If I refresh this page, and if you notice that if I reset this, it clears the input form field and prints the initial value which is alias. Each time when the button is being pressed, it creates a new form with a key value. So this is how the useState and the key properties work in sync in our React projects. So this is all about how to use useState in your React projects. And for this tutorial, we primarily focused on using string value as an example. But you can extend the same with for numbers, arrays, objects, or even functions. So that's basically all about the ideology and the working principles behind this useState. Hope you find this video useful. If you do so, consider subscribing, and I will see you again in the next one.